Brandon had always believed that the ugliest truths started with the smallest lies. That night, as he stood in the kitchen doorway watching Julia clutch her phone like it was some kind of lifeline, that belief finally proved itself right. She hadn't heard him enter. She was too busy pacing, a hand pressed theatrically to her forehead as she fed someone on the other end of the line the same soft, breathy voice she used whenever she wanted something. "No, Doug. I just don't feel well. I'm miserable, really." Brandon didn't even blink. She wasn't miserable. She wasn't sick. She wasn't anything except predictable. He stepped forward just enough for his shadow to fall across the floor. "If you're going to play sick," he said quietly, "you might want to stop smiling while you talk to him." Julia froze. Her shoulders tightened, like an animal caught stealing food. "Brandon, save it." His voice was calm, almost detached, but something inside him burned cold. "You pretended to be sick to skip a trip with me, so you could spend the night with him." She swallowed, eyes darting anywhere but at him. "I'm not letting you string me along with whatever you and Douglas think you're doing." He moved past her toward the door, the weight of decision already settled on him. "You want to see other men? Great. You're free. Starting now." "Brandon, wait." But he didn't. He walked out without looking back, inhaling the cold night air like it was the first real breath he'd taken in months. Outside, he stopped beside a line of parked cars and watched through the reflection in a store window as Julia ran outside moments later, scanning the sidewalk like she expected him to be lingering, waiting to be convinced, manipulated, reeled back in. She didn't see him. She never looked in the right direction. And for the first time in a very long time, Brandon felt an unexpected flicker of satisfaction. Not pleasure, nothing close to it, but something like justice. If she lost the man she wanted for the night, if she ruined her evening with Douglas, that was a start. He almost whispered good under his breath. Julia had once been the brightest part of his life. He'd met her at a Christmas party 2 years prior. She'd been standing beneath a string of frosted lights, holding a glass of champagne, her smile effortless and warm. She laughed at his jokes. He fell for her instantly. Within 3 months, they were married in a courthouse ceremony. Fast, impulsive, joyous. Back then it felt right. Back then everything did. But back then had become a foreign country. Months passed, and little cracks appeared, too small to be fractures, too subtle to be addressed. But they grew. And Brandon felt something change in her eyes, in the way she spoke to him, the way she pulled back like he was a stranger she tolerated. Still, he tried. God knows he tried. He even planned a surprise getaway, hoping to revive the warmth they once shared. He booked the cabin, arranged the time off, packed her favorite wine. And she destroyed that hope with one phone call, her voice scratchy, pitiful. "I'm sick. I can't go." He believed her, like a fool. He canceled everything, even rearranged plans with friends in Chicago just to be close to home in case she needed him. But that night, sitting in a restaurant, across from men he trusted with his life, he dialed her again. Busy signal. Then again. Busy. Again. Busy. That alone was strange. But fate, as always, liked to kick a man when he was already down. When he looked toward the window near the bar, he spotted her, Julia, walking inside arm in arm with Douglas, laughing, radiant, dressed like she'd been planning this date for days. His heartbeat didn't speed up. It didn't slow down. It just stopped. He watched as they slid into a booth. Doug's hand brushed hers, her head tilted toward him, the same way she once tilted it toward Brandon. Disbelief turned to a heat so sharp it was almost cold. He hated Douglas, not because Doug took something from him, but because Julia gave it so easily. He'd never forgive either of them. Later that night, after retreating to his hotel at the Drake with a numbness that felt like anesthesia, his phone lit up again and again with her messages, calls, voicemails, long texts begging him to talk. He deleted everything. He turned his phone off, then on again, just to watch them flood in. He deleted them again, slower this time. Sleep didn't come, but clarity did. By dawn, he knew exactly what he had to do. Saturday morning found him in a conference room with Adam and Ben, friends, colleagues, the two people he trusted more than anyone in the entire company. He told them everything, not the emotional parts. He had no space left for crying or trembling admissions. He told them the facts. Julia's affair, the lies, the marriage that was over. "Then don't sign a damn thing with Greg until I get this sorted," Brandon said, leaning back. Adam nodded. "We've got your back." "We always did," Ben added. They didn't ask him to calm down. They didn't tell him to reconsider. They just listened like real friends do. He didn't go to the office that day. He didn't want to see Greg or Julia. He didn't even want to walk past the hallway where he'd once picked her up after work. Instead, he read, he paced, he thought. And on Sunday morning, he drove silently through an empty downtown toward his office, already planning out Monday. His marriage had ended the moment she reached across that restaurant table for another man. But Monday would be the day he started ending everything else. Everything necessary. Everything poisonous. Everything Julia had ever touched. Monday arrived like a blade, sharp, cold, and inevitable. Brandon parked in the underground garage of the firm, took the elevator to the 7th floor, and stepped into the quiet hallway of Grace System Solutions, with a calmness that felt unnatural. It wasn't serenity. It was resignation. The kind you reach when you know the next hours will carve your life into before and after. He walked past the glossy glass doors toward Roger Pennington's office. His attorney, his longtime friend, the kind of man who could look you in the eyes and know you were lying. Brandon didn't bother sugarcoating anything. "I'm done," he said, taking a seat opposite Roger. Roger set his pen down. "With the marriage?" "With the pretending," Brandon replied. "I don't love her anymore. I haven't for a while. She made sure of that." Roger nodded once, slowly. "I can't represent you both?" "Not now." "I don't want you to," Brandon said. "I need someone who will go through her like a hurricane." "Jacob Easterman," Roger said immediately. "He'll cut clean and fast." "Good." By the time Brandon left the office, Jacob had already scheduled a meeting for Tuesday morning and promised the divorce papers by late Tuesday night. Julia would receive them Wednesday. Brandon didn't feel triumph, not even relief. Just the dull certainty of a man following through on the only road left. At the bank, he sat with a manager, sliding his ID across the counter. "I need a check for half of the savings account," Brandon said. "My wife will keep the rest." The manager nodded. "And the checking account?" He paused. "Leave it. Let her pay the bills. Let her see for herself what survival costs." "Checking stays joint," he said. "Savings get split." The clerk returned with a crisp cashier's check. One more thread cut. He walked out of the bank into a wind that whipped through his coat, but he barely felt it. His life was unraveling and mending at the same time. It was strangely cleansing. Financial planning wasn't just practical, it was a final declaration of independence. For years they'd maintained a routine, monthly transfers for expenses, monthly deposits into savings, separate investment portfolios managed by different brokers. It all worked fine until Julia stopped working on the marriage. Brandon opened 2 new accounts, one checking, one savings, under only his name. The bank clerk asked if he wanted to transfer all funds. No, Brandon said, just enough for a restart. He supported Julia for years. She'd never understand, but that didn't matter anymore. When he arrived at the office, the first person he saw was Greg Malloy, the CEO, Julia's boss, the same man who signed both their paychecks, the same man whose expression always carried that smug, paternal smirk that Brandon used to ignore. Not today. Greg stepped toward him. Brandon, we need to talk. About? Julia. Greg crossed his arms. Fix whatever this is, or don't bother showing up. Brandon stared at him, expression flat. I'm filing for divorce. I'm not fixing anything. Greg's eyes hardened. Then I'm firing you. Brandon didn't blink. Okay. You don't care, Greg snapped. No, Brandon said simply. Not anymore. Greg stepped aside, furious, but Brandon was already walking past him. He didn't fight the firing. He didn't want the job if Julia still breathed the same office air. 30 minutes later, he packed his things in a cardboard box. A few notebooks, old prototypes, a photo of the team at a tech expo. Then he found the photo, the wedding picture Julia once framed and placed on his desk, insisting it brightened the room. He stared at it for a long moment, then dropped it straight into the trash. When he stepped into the hallway, Julia was coming out of the elevator carrying a stack of binders. Her eyes widened when she saw the box in his hands. Brandon, what happened? Divorce is happening, he said, voice smooth, tired, final. That's not... Brandon, we need to talk. No, we don't. He walked past her without slowing. You made your choice at the restaurant. She flinched visibly. Please, she whispered. I didn't mean... But Brandon was already at the door. Behind him, her voice cracked. Brandon, wait! He didn't. He pushed through the exit, feeling the weight of the office, the marriage, the years fall off him in increments. He didn't look back, not even once. That afternoon, the next chapter of his life began quietly, almost anticlimactically. In his new apartment, with bare walls, a mattress on the floor, and a folding table where a dining set should be, Brandon opened his laptop and began writing code. Not just any code. A new security program that could rewrite the industry if he finished it. He typed through the evening, through the night, through exhaustion, through anger. Every line of code was a step away from Julia. Every function was a nail in the coffin of what they once were. When dawn broke, the light fell across a man who had lost everything he thought he needed, and gained everything he truly needed. A new beginning, built by his own hands. Brandon didn't sleep, not because he couldn't, because he didn't want to. The silence of the new apartment was strangely energizing, and for the first time in years he felt a sense of direction. Raw, unfiltered, almost dangerous. By Tuesday morning, he had showered, shaved, dressed in a clean navy shirt, and walked into Jacob Easterman's office with a folder of documents under his arm, and a kind of calm resolve that made Jacob raise an eyebrow. "You look like a man who already buried the body," Jacob said. "I buried the marriage," Brandon replied. "The body goes next." Jacob chuckled. "Good. Because once we file these, there's no turning back." "There was never any turning back," Brandon said. They reviewed the documents, financial disclosures, asset lists, digital account screenshots, Julia's recent withdrawal records, and evidence of separation. Brandon didn't want to weaponize the affair. He wanted it legally irrelevant, but emotionally unmistakable. "Everything clean, above board," Jacob concluded, tapping the papers. "Judges respect that. It'll give you leverage." "Send the papers by Wednesday morning," Brandon said. "I want her to open them before work." "I'll have them delivered at 7 a.m. Brandon stood. "Thank you." Jacob paused. "You sure you're ready for what follows?" Brandon gave a humorless half-smile. "I've been ready for months." Tuesday evening should have felt lonely. It didn't. Brandon went to the gym for the first time in weeks, then grabbed a coffee from a small 24-hour cafe 2 blocks from his apartment. He opened his laptop and kept working on his software, line after line, building something that felt more stable than any marriage ever could. Around 11 p.m., his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Greg, you think you can just walk out and leave this place hanging? You'd better stay away from Julia. She's been through enough." Brandon didn't even blink. He typed back, "Brandon, whatever you think you know, you don't." Less than a minute later, another message. "Greg, she told me everything. You're unstable, obsessed, controlling." Brandon laughed out loud in the empty cafe. Typical Julia. Rewrite history to feel like the victim. He typed one final message. "Brandon, she'll get the truth delivered to her door in 8 hours." And then he blocked the number. At 7:06 a.m., while Brandon was drinking black coffee in his apartment, Jacob texted, "Documents delivered." She opened the door. Perfect. At 7:09, Brandon's phone rang. "Julia." He let it ring. At 7:10, she called again. He turned the phone face down. At 7:12, a text. "Julia. Brandon, please talk to me." At 7:14, "Julia, we can fix this. Don't do this, please." At 7:17, "Julia, I'm begging you, Brandon. Please answer the phone." He didn't. At 7:19, "Julia, I didn't cheat. It wasn't like that, I swear. Please just hear me out." Brandon exhaled slowly, not with anger, with clarity. He typed, "Brandon, you made your truth clear at the restaurant. I'm done. Talk to my attorney." He hit send, placed the phone on the table, and got dressed for the day. That afternoon, news reached him the way gossip always does, too fast, too much, all at once. A former co-worker, Evan, messaged him. "Evan, bro, Greg just got into a screaming match with Julia in his office. HR had to step in." "Something about divorce papers?" Brandon, "Not my problem anymore." Evan, "He looks pissed. Like, throw a chair pissed." Brandon, "Still not my problem." 5 minutes later. Evan, "They pulled her into HR. She looked like she was about to faint." Brandon stared at the message and realized something surprising. He felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no bitterness, no regret. Just nothing. Julia's world was collapsing, but he had already stepped out of its gravity. That evening, Brandon met with a potential investor for his new software, a quiet, meticulous cybersecurity contractor named Raymond Cross. They talked for 2 hours over dinner. By the time they shook hands, Brandon had secured initial funding, a future, a project, a life outside the ruins of a marriage. He walked home through the cold night, hands in his pockets, breath visible in the air. The city felt sharper, clearer, almost cleaner. Halfway home, his phone vibrated again. Another message from Julia. He considered ignoring it, but opened it instead. "Julia, can we meet tomorrow? Just to talk? Please? I need to tell you something important. It's not what you think." "None of it is." Brandon slipped the phone back into his pocket. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe she wanted closure. Maybe she wanted to rewrite the ending. He whispered into the darkness, "You already told me everything I needed to know," and kept walking toward the future, away from the wreckage. He didn't look back, not even once. The next morning arrived with a thin gray drizzle, the kind that blurred the edges of the city and made every sound feel distant. Brandon woke early, showered without urgency, and dressed in a charcoal shirt that matched the weather. He made himself a small breakfast, though he barely touched it. Today wouldn't change anything, but it would clarify everything. At 9:40 a.m., his phone buzzed. "Julia, I'll be at the Kestrel Cafe at 10. Please come. Just talk to me once. One time. That's all I'm asking." Brandon stared at the message for a long moment, not out of doubt, out of calculation. He didn't owe her a meeting, but he wanted to walk into that cafe and see the truth written on her face, without excuses, without illusions, without the softness of marriage distorting the edges. At 9:50, he put on his jacket and left the apartment. The Kestrel Cafe was quiet, almost solemn in the rainy morning light. Its wide windows looked out onto a row of traffic lights blinking through the mist. Brandon stepped inside, letting the soft hum of conversations wash over him. The smell of roasted espresso lingered in the air. He saw her immediately. Julia sat near the back, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. Her hair wasn't done. Her makeup was smeared. She looked as if she hadn't slept. For the first time, Brandon saw something he had never seen in her eyes before. Fear. He approached the table calmly, pulled out the chair, and sat down without saying a word. Julia swallowed hard. "Thank you for coming." Brandon didn't respond. He simply waited. She twisted her fingers together. I got the papers, and I know why you sent them. I know what it looked like." Still, he said nothing. Emotion rose in her voice. "Brandon, it wasn't what you think. There was no affair." He raised an eyebrow. "That's the story you're going with?" Her face flushed. "Douglas and we talked. That's all. I wasn't cheating. I just needed someone to listen. Someone who wasn't invested. Someone who didn't see me as—" She trailed off. "As what?" Brandon asked quietly. "A disappointment." He exhaled slowly. "So instead of talking to your husband, you found a stranger to listen." "He wasn't a stranger," she snapped. Then her voice cracked. "He was someone who understood how overwhelmed I've been." "And you didn't think I could handle the truth?" Brandon's voice stayed even. "You were so focused," she whispered. "On work, on deadlines, on projects. And when you planned that trip, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to pretend everything was okay." He leaned back. "So you pretended to be sick so you could go out with him?" Julia's lower lip trembled. "I made a mistake. A stupid, selfish mistake." Brandon didn't look away. "I wasn't angry because you slipped. I wasn't angry because you met someone for dinner. I was angry because you lied to my face and felt nothing." She covered her mouth with her hand as tears filled her eyes. "I didn't sleep with him. I swear to you, Brandon." He believed her. It didn't matter. "That isn't the point," he said softly. Julia's tears spilled. "Then what is the point? What do you want me to say?" "I want you to admit something," Brandon said. "Not to make me stay, not to fix anything, just to understand what went wrong. She stared at him, frozen. Admit, he continued, that the moment you stepped into that restaurant with him, something between us ended. Julia shook her head rapidly. No, that's not true. It is. Her shoulders collapsed. She lowered her head and whispered, I didn't think you'd ever find out. And yet, Brandon replied, I did. She began to cry harder, silent, shaking sobs. A few customers glanced their way but turned back to their drinks. Brandon felt a distant sympathy, but love, that part of him had gone quiet. Brandon, Julia wiped her cheeks. I still love you. He looked at her gently. I know. And I want to fix this. I don't. She froze completely. It was the first time he had said it clearly, without hesitation, without anger. I don't want to fix it, Brandon repeated. I don't want to go back. I don't want to repair something that already ended. I don't want a life where I have to wonder who you're texting or where you really are. I don't want to resent you. I don't want to keep trying. Julia choked out a sound that was half breath, half sob. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I know, Brandon said quietly. And I forgive you. Her eyes snapped up. You forgive me? Yes. Hope flickered in her expression. But forgiveness, he added, is not the same thing as reconciliation. The hope vanished. She broke down completely, leaning onto the table, shoulders shaking as tears poured freely. It was the kind of crying that came from somewhere deep, somewhere raw, like a child who finally realized the consequences of their choices. Brandon watched, calm, almost serene. The storm had passed inside him long ago. When Julia finally looked up, her face was streaked with mascara, her eyes red and swollen. Is this really it? She whispered. He nodded once. It is. She exhaled, shaking, and her voice collapsed into a whisper. I ruined everything. Brandon stood. No, he said gently. It was already broken. You just showed me where the cracks were. He placed his card, the number of his attorney, on the table, then stepped away. Julia stared at the card as if it were a verdict. When he walked toward the door, he heard something that almost made him pause. A soft, fragile, utterly devastated sob. He didn't turn around. He left the cafe, letting the cold drizzle touch his face, and felt a strange freedom settle into his lungs. The past was closing behind him. But the future, wild, uncertain, demanding, was already beginning to open. Brandon stepped out into the rain, letting the drizzle soak through his hair and collar. It felt almost symbolic, like the city itself was rinsing off the last residue of something that had already died. He didn't rush home. He walked slowly, letting the morning unfold without urgency. By the time he reached his apartment, the rain had eased into a mist. He hung his jacket on the hook, sat on the couch, and let the silence settle. But silence never lasted long. His phone buzzed. A voicemail. Julia again. He deleted it without listening. Then another. Deleted. Then a text. Julia, please call me. Please, I need to explain. I can't breathe. He switched the phone to silent, tossed it onto the counter, and went to make coffee. A strange calmness had taken root in him. There was no guilt, no regret, only clarity. By noon, he was already dressed and ready to meet Adam and Ben at the Corinthian Hotel Cafe. The lobby of the Corinthian was elegant, with high marble columns and gold accents that reflected the afternoon light. The cafe smelled of warm bread and cinnamon, a comforting contrast to the cold weather outside. Adam and Ben were already at a corner table, 2 cups of cappuccino steaming between them. The moment Brandon approached, Adam raised an eyebrow. "Well, you look composed," Ben smirked, "which is terrifying, because you were definitely not composed yesterday." Brandon sat, took a sip of the coffee waiting for him, and nodded. "It's over. I'm filing." They exchanged glances, part sympathy, part approval. "Good," Adam said. "It's the right thing." Brandon leaned forward. "One more thing. Don't sign anything with Greg yet. No contracts, no renewals, nothing." Ben frowned. "Because of the merger?" "Because," Brandon said evenly, "I need to know whether he intends to weaponize my personal situation. And if he plans to, he won't get access to the project I'm working on." Adam whistled. "So this is about your new system?" Brandon nodded slowly. "Yes. And I'm not letting anyone use it against me." The weight in his tone made them both straighten. "You have our support," Adam said. "Both of us." "Always," Ben added. Brandon felt a warmth that had been missing for months. He nodded in gratitude. "Thanks. It means more than you know." They spoke for another hour about logistics, finances, possible outcomes. By the time they parted, Brandon had a clear plan. Saturday melted into a slow, quiet day. Brandon stayed home, reading the novel he'd bought last month and never opened. He made dinner, watched a documentary, took a long shower, and slept better than he had in weeks. Sunday morning, he walked through the empty streets toward the office. The city felt different when it was quiet, like it was giving him space to recalibrate. The office building was mostly empty. Only the cleaning staff and the security guard were present. Brandon unlocked his office door, turned on the lights, and sat at his desk. He went over files. He drafted emails. He organized the paperwork for the upcoming legal process. By noon, he had outlined everything he needed for Monday. But as he prepared to leave, he stopped. On the corner of his desk lay a framed photo of him and Julia on their wedding day. Her smile was radiant, bright, intoxicating. His arm around her, his grin full of love and certainty. He picked it up, held it, studied it, for one last time. Then he opened the desk drawer, pulled out a small trash bag, and dropped the frame inside. The metallic clink of shattered glass echoed in the quiet office like a closing chapter. He tied the bag and placed it next to the trash bin. Done. On Monday morning, Brandon arrived early and headed straight to his attorney's office. Roger, his longtime lawyer, greeted him with a sympathetic smile. "You're sure?" Roger asked after hearing the story again. "Yes," Brandon said. "Completely." Roger nodded. "Then I can't represent both sides. Conflict of interest." "I know. But I can recommend someone who's sharp, fair, efficient." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Jacob Easterman." Brandon had heard the name. Easterman was known for being both polite and ruthless when necessary. Perfect. "Let's get this moving," Brandon said. Within an hour, Easterman agreed to take the case. "I'll have the documents ready by the end of Tuesday," Jacob said, adjusting his glasses. "We'll arrange delivery Wednesday morning." Brandon felt a strange satisfaction. Procedure, order, control. Everything that had been missing. He spent the rest of the afternoon at the bank, opening new accounts, transferring half of the savings, ensuring every penny was documented. He wasn't being petty, just precise. By the time he left, the financial boundary lines were perfectly drawn. Early Tuesday evening, Brandon returned to the office to finalize some reports before the divorce papers were sent out. He barely settled at his desk when Greg stormed in, flushed, irritated, and visibly ready for confrontation. "Brandon, Greg snapped. "We need to talk about Julia." Brandon looked up slowly. "No, Greg, we don't." Greg's jaw tightened. "Yes, we do. She's miserable, and I'm not letting her fall apart while you—" Brandon's expression turned ice cold. "My marriage is not a company meeting." Greg pointed a finger at him. "Fix it, or you're done here." Brandon stood, calm, absolutely calm. "No." Greg blinked. "No?" "I'm done," Brandon said. "With the marriage, and with letting you tell me how to live my life." Greg's cheeks reddened. "Then you leave me no choice." Brandon waited. "You're fired." Brandon nodded once. "Okay." Greg frowned, caught off guard by the lack of reaction. "That's all you have to say?" "Yes." Brandon picked up his jacket. "Because unlike you, Greg, I don't confuse threats with leverage." Greg stared, confused and angry. Brandon stepped past him, stopped at the doorway, and added, "And remember, firing me doesn't give you access to my system." Greg's eyes widened. Brandon walked out without another word. He returned to his office one last time, packed a few personal items, took the trash bag with the photo and tossed it into the lobby dumpster on his way out. As he approached the elevator, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. "Brandon." Julia. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red. She was trembling. "Please," she whispered, reaching for his arm. "Don't leave like this." He stepped back. "Julia, this is already done." She shook her head desperately. "I can change. I swear. I can fix this. Just give me time." Brandon looked at her with a softness that surprised even him. "I believe you can change," he said gently. "But not for me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Brandon, please." He pressed the elevator button. "I don't hate you," he said softly. "I just don't belong in this marriage anymore." The elevator doors opened. Julia broke into sobs. "I love you." He paused. Then, "I know, but I'm still leaving." The doors closed between them. And just like that, the old life ended. The new one, raw, uncertain, and completely his, began. Brandon barely slept the night before the first mandatory counseling session. Not because he had doubts, he was long past that, but because he knew exactly what the next week would look like. Julia would play innocent, the firm would try to squeeze him, Greg would pretend to be a neutral party, and the judge, she would do what judges always do when emotions cloud the room, push for reconciliation, harmony, stability, stability. That word had no meaning anymore, not for him. The moment he walked into Dr. Harper's office the next morning, he felt the familiar fake calm, the kind therapists create by lowering lights and putting plants in corners. Julia was already there, perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect trembling lip. She looked like she had rehearsed sorrow in front of a mirror. "Brandon," she whispered, as if they were the only two people in the universe. "I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about what we lost." He sat down opposite her. "What you threw away," he corrected quietly. The therapist cleared her throat gently. "Let's begin by acknowledging feelings." "No," Brandon said, turning his gaze to Julia. "Let's begin with the truth, because acknowledging that seems to be your hardest skill." Julia flinched, not dramatically, just enough to look human again. The session went downhill after that. Every time Julia spoke, it was a mixture of self-praise, carefully curated remorse, and thinly veiled manipulation. She talked about being confused, emotionally neglected, vulnerable to attention. Brandon listened, silent, arms crossed, like a man observing an anthill through glass. Dr. Harper tried to get him to empathize. He didn't. After 40 minutes, Julia was wiping fake tears. The therapist was scribbling aggressively, and Brandon was ready to claw his way out of the room. "Brandon," Dr. Harper said at last, "I need to hear your perspective. What would you want to try to rebuild trust?" He leaned forward slightly. "I don't want to rebuild anything," he said with the calm of a surgeon cutting a cord. "You don't rebuild a house after you find termites in the foundation. You tear it down. You walk away. And you never buy from that contractor again." Julia's face collapsed. Not a performance this time, but the genuine shock of someone realizing control is slipping through her fingers. "Brandon, please." He stood up. "Make sure the court gets your notes. I'm done here." And he walked out, leaving Julia mid-sentence, stunned and trembling, like a person whose script had been stolen from her hands. The judge tries to stop the divorce. 1 week later, Brandon stood in the courtroom again, hands in pockets, expression carved from stone. Julia sat beside her attorney, a man who looked like he enjoyed manipulating chaos for sport. Judge Caldwell studied the folder on her desk. "Mr. Haas," she said, "I've reviewed your counselor's report. It says you refuse to participate constructively." "That's correct," Brandon said, "because there is nothing left to construct." And yet, the judge sighed deeply. This is a short marriage. No children, no claims of abuse. Many courts would push for further reconciliation. "I'm not asking many courts," Brandon said. "Just yours." Julia leaned forward. "Your Honor, I just want a chance. I love him. I made a mistake." Brandon didn't look at her. "You didn't make a mistake," he said. "You made a series of choices." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Caldwell closed the folder slowly. "Mr. Haas, my job is not to encourage impulsive decisions." "It's not impulsive," Brandon replied. "I saw her with another man, in a restaurant we used to go to together. On a night she lied about being sick. That's not impulse. That's clarity." Julia's attorney opened his mouth, probably to say something accusatory or dramatic. But Brandon spoke first. "If this divorce doesn't go through, Your Honor, I will file a separate action. I will subpoena Greg Martin, CEO of Grace System Solutions. I will provide evidence of workplace misconduct connected to this marriage. I will bring every message, every call log, every witness in public record." Julia froze. Greg froze even harder. He was sitting in the back of the courtroom. Judge Caldwell's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Are you threatening the court, Mr. Haas?" "No," Brandon said. "I'm stating consequences." The judge took a long moment, then another, then another. Finally, she exhaled, leaned back, and said, "Divorce granted." Julia gasped. Greg's shoulders sagged in relief. The last thing he needed was his name on a subpoena. Brandon simply nodded, as if the world had aligned the way it always should have. Walking out and running into Greg. The moment court adjourned, Greg intercepted him in the hallway. "Well," Greg said with a forced smile, "quite a show." Brandon didn't slow down. "If you're here to talk about Julia, talk to her attorney." "I'm here," Greg said, speeding up to walk beside him, "to talk about your future." Brandon stopped. "My future," he repeated. "You have 10 seconds. Greg licked his lips nervously. "We don't want to lose you. The security upgrade you designed, it's years ahead of the competition. If you come back, I'm willing to renegotiate your position. Better pay, more autonomy, The deal we discussed? Brandon smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, just knowingly. I already wrote the program, Greg. I own it. Not the company. That's negotiable. No, it isn't. Greg inhaled sharply. Listen, Brandon. Be reasonable. You fired me because you didn't want drama in the office, Brandon said calmly. But then you let my wife sleep with your senior project manager. So let me ask you, is that the kind of stability your company represents? Greg swallowed. Hard. Brandon, the board will reconsider. Brandon stepped closer, lowering his voice just slightly. I don't need the board. I don't need you. I don't even need that company. Greg stared at him, baffled. Brandon walked away. For the first time in his career, with no job, no stability, no marriage, he felt weightless, untethered, free. Julia tries. One last time. When he exited the courthouse, Julia was waiting outside, leaning on the railing, arms wrapped around herself as if bracing against a storm. Brandon, she whispered. Please, we should talk. No, he said. You can't just throw away everything. I didn't throw it away, he said. You did. I'm just taking out the trash. Her breath hitched. I never meant to hurt you. He finally looked at her. Really looked. Julia, he said evenly. I hope one day you understand that you didn't lose me because you cheated. You lost me because you thought I wouldn't do anything about it. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and for once it seemed real. But Brandon stepped past her, without a backward glance, and that, he knew, was the real end. A new beginning, one he didn't expect. He returned home to his new apartment, small, quiet, functional. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel hostile. It felt earned. He opened his laptop. The new security platform booted instantly. Sleek, fast, powerful. Something no corporate committee could water down or compromise. It wasn't just a program. It was his future. His proof that he didn't break when life tried to hollow him out. He began writing the final integration layer, fingers flying without hesitation. 2 hours later, someone knocked on his door. He didn't expect visitors. He opened it. It was Julia. Hair messy, face pale, breathing shaky. She looked nothing like the polished woman from counseling or court. Brandon, she said, voice trembling, I don't have anywhere to go. He stared at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he stepped aside, not to let her in, but to close the door between them, gently, firmly, with finality. Julia's soft sob reverberated through the wood, then faded down the hallway as her footsteps retreated into the dark. Brandon turned the lock. Then he walked back to his desk, sat down, and kept writing. Line after line of code, each keystroke steady and certain. This time, he wasn't fixing a marriage. He was building a life, his own, and there would be no more rewrites.